Indonesia is a cultural melting pot with influences from Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. The country of 17,000 islands is educating the world about its culture, as well as the threats from climate change, something residents are confronting in real time. I speak to Sade Bimantara, diplomat at Indonesia's Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Cultural exchange was on full display as Indonesia's embassy hosted the WOW Festival in Washington, D.C. The cultural event featured Indonesian music, dance, art, and food. Let me ask you about the takeaways from something like that. How does that kind of move the needle for Indonesia in terms of like an awakening perhaps for people who may not be all that aware?
Because we are so far away from the United States, right? Indonesia is not as near as Canada, Mexico, so it's not oftentimes on top of minds of Americans, right? And so we want to change that. We want to showcase Indonesia in a good and best light. And so the takeaways is that more appreciations towards Indonesia's culture, and people know and understand more about what is Indonesia, the music, for example, the dances, the food, the products that we produce, and so the tourism potential as well. And so those are some of the takeaways of our festival, for example.
We see so much friction in the world where people have misunderstandings about other countries' cultures. Can you talk about cultural diplomacy and the role that it plays and people-to-people exchanges, that kind of whole approach of letting people kind of get a sense of, that sure, there are differences, but actually we may have more in common than the differences themselves?
The one thing that I observe, and I've been in this sort of business diplomacy for 20 plus years, and I've seen people from all sort of nations, cultures, backgrounds, and whatnot, right? And even though we may look different, color of skin, color of hair, color of the eyes, your heights, and where you come from, but deep there, each person, they have the same longing, same cravings. They long for love, family, for example, and they want safety, and they want to put food on the table for their family. So at the end of the day, people are the same, right? And through cultural diplomacy, we connect people. We say that there's more to life and more to people than just cosmetics, than just what you see in front of you. Get to know the people, befriend them, know their culture, know their background, and that will change your mind. That will change your life too.
Bimantara is a career diplomat. Born on the island of Bali, he's worked on advancing Indonesia's relationship with Australia, New Zealand, Samoa, and others. I always like to ask people about their choices in life. What drew you to this career? And I always think diplomacy, it's got to be rewarding, but it's also got to be quite challenging and difficult at times. What was it about this job that really attracted you?
Civil service. The key word here is service. And I did not plan to be a diplomat. It was not on my short list of career. But what drew me was, I see many challenges for Indonesia in terms of its development, in terms of our relationship with the world, with other countries. And I saw an opportunity for me to contribute. And so I befriended someone who was on a scholarship in New Zealand where I studied. And then we talked about working in the foreign service. And he said, there's an opening here. And I applied, and I thought this is an opportunity for me. If I get accepted, I want to contribute. I want to, give a little bit for my country to build and to develop. So that's where I'm coming from.
I interviewed the author, Prag Khanna, a couple years back. He came out with the book, The Future is Asian. And he talked about the regional area and how a lot of us look to the West, the United States or Europe, but that Asia is now kind of this rising region that really people need to keep their eye on because it's really very dynamic. I want to get your thoughts on his assessment of Asia and then Indonesia's place within that.
Right. Well, he talked about the future of the world is in Asia. But for Indonesia, many thousands years ago, many hundreds of years ago, the future of Indonesia was in Asia, right? We had great relationship with the powers in Asia, in East Asia, including China, Japan, Korea, and others. And we started our foreign relationship with our immediate neighbors around in Southeast Asia and also East Asia and others. And so in the modern times, 75 years or so, of course, Indonesia built relationship with Europe, United States, and other countries. But in our heart, it remains, we are in Asia and we have a great relationship with countries in Asia. That's where our past come from, and that's where our future lies.
Indonesia is highly vulnerable to climate change. Coastal villages are already facing sea level rise. By some estimates, by 2050, up to 95% of Jakarta's coastal areas could be submerged due to sea level rise. For this reason, the country has an ambitious plan to move its capital out of Jakarta to Nusantara. Climate issues, obviously important. You're seeing sinking. Can you talk to me about, because a lot of times people talk about climate change kind of in the abstract, they're not seeing it firsthand. Can you talk to me about the importance of it and the challenges of it?
Well, I tell you what, Indonesia has 17,000 islands. We are an archipelago. Coast to coast stretches as wide as the United States is from California to New York, even wider, right? And that 17,000 islands depend on the sea level. So we're seeing some of our islands, because of climate change, are beginning to disappear. In fact, our capital city is also sinking. And this is one of the most important reasons why Indonesia is moving its capital city to another island in Kalimantan and Borneo. And so climate change is something real and not abstract for Indonesia.
Obviously, Indonesia can do what it can do, but you have to look at big powers. I mean, it's the U.S., China, India, these bigger countries that are emitters. What would you like to say to them about what needs to happen? Because clearly everybody's got to be rolling in the same direction, right?
Keywords is externality, and secondly, room for development, right? Externalities has been enjoyed by the industrial countries for the last 100 years without any price. And now with the Paris Agreement, with the UNFCCC, of course, we are on this. We are on the same page, and we are doing our utmost to have a net zero emission by 2060 and reduce our GHG emissions as well. But now we have to pay those costs, those externalities that were not paid for by the industrial powers in the last 100 years. So we want room for development also. And I think this has been understood, but not enough discussed or committed. So we need that strong commitment, and we need real commitment on the ground to give that room for development for countries like Indonesia and other developing countries, for example.
But as you mentioned, you've got to move the capital from Jakarta. It's expensive. It's difficult. I mean, what's the status?
We are going through the first stage. So the final period of the first stage, which is 2 years. We started development in 2022, and in 2024, our president just held the independence ceremony in the new capital city. And 2 years, Mike, that's an ambitious time frame. So imagine a space 3 times bigger than Washington, D.C., and forested area. And within those 2 years, we were able to build roads, bridges, also buildings, and presidential office, apartment blocks, and parks, and others. So it is an ambitious project, but we are confident with the strong political commitment that we have, and then the support of our people, we will be able to finish this project in time for the next 20 or something years. And remember, Mike, the United States also moved their capital. Australia also moved their capital. Brazil also moved their capital. And they took more than 5 decades.
You get an award for that. That's pretty quick. But I think it also probably, as a diplomat, helps you to press the case of just how serious climate change is. When you talk about, look, we've got to pack up everything and we've got to move. I mean, this is serious.
It is serious. And we're showing it by doing it, by showcasing what's at stake here for our people. Countries in the Pacific, Tuvalu, for example, they have to relocate. But in Indonesia, some people also had to relocate because of rising sea levels, because of climate change, because of those emissions that may not historically been our fault, the fault of Indonesia and other developing countries, for example. And so we are pressing a strong case in the UN bilaterally. Of course, we're talking with our US counterparts, with our Chinese counterparts and European counterparts on how we can collaborate together, how we can cooperate together to solve what is an existential problem for the world, not just for one country or two, but for all of us.
What are those conversations like?
Tough.
Just one word, huh?
Difficult, but there is a strong political commitment.
Yeah.
When you see it.
I think you would say tough, but also important.
It is the most important conversation for our generation and for our kids' generation. And we owe it to our kids and grandchildren that we find a solution in this one generation, so that we are not leaving our kids and our grandkids a planet that is not livable.
Moving the capital will cost an estimated $35 billion. Indonesia is looking for foreign investment for the project, scheduled for completion in 2045. Financing is always a big issue. Is it just going and saying, hey, we need a helping hand? I mean, we're not the ones who started all this pollution, but we are the ones taking it on the chin.
Yeah, that's right. So we are talking with our partners. United States, for example, they have been such a gracious and great partner for Indonesia. And so we're working in the framework of JETP, for example, Just Energy Transition Partnership, whereby $20 billion are allocated for transitioning our energy sources. We're working with China, for example, in terms of renewable solar. We just rolled out one of the largest, if not the largest, floated solar farm in Indonesia. And that is in collaboration with China as well. And also modes of transportation that are lower emission as well with other countries, with Korea, with Japan, and other countries. So we are, working with our partners and ensuring that we can finance those projects to transition our energy.
Let me ask one final question. You've talked about the tough conversations. You've talked about the difficulties, finance and climate change. You've described the job to me that sounds pretty tough. I mean, you have to have these tough conversations. Clearly, you're here in Washington, D.C. You got to work the Washington, D.C. circuit, but then you also have to answer to Jakarta, which means 3 a.m. phone calls and meetings. So what is it about the job that you love, and what brings you joy and hope, given the fact that these are daunting tasks?
What brings me joy and hope is that the reality that we are all on this together. And the issue of climate, for example, brings us together, right? Because at the end of the day, whatever your differences are, if we cannot save our planet, we will have nowhere to live. So let's put aside our differences and work on our common interests. And let's collaborate and cooperate together on this. And that brings me joy, Mike, because I know that every day I wake up, I will have someone who thinks the same way. And I can reach out to them and say, hey, let's tackle our mutual problem because we have mutual interest in this sector. Let's do that. Let's work together. Right? And so that brings me, happiness and joy.
Yeah. Global citizens.
Global citizen, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.